My name is Dorothy Frimpong, and I am 62 years old. I spent 24 years working in payroll and compensation administration for a large municipal employer, pension calculations, survivor benefit elections, service credit verification, the arithmetic of what a person has earned over a working life, and what they and their family are entitled to collect. I know what a defined benefit pension is. I know what a survivor benefit election means. The choice a retiring employee makes between taking a higher monthly payment with no survivor benefit or a reduced monthly payment that continues to a named survivor after the retiree's death. I know what the enrollment window is, what the deadline is, and what happens when paperwork is not processed correctly. I know because I processed this paperwork for 24 years. I sat on the administrative side of every one of these decisions. When my husband Raymond retired from his government position 11 years ago, he elected the joint and survivor option, the reduced payment with the survivor benefit that would continue to me if he died first. He told me this. I saw the election form. He submitted it. Raymond died 14 months after his retirement. And when I contacted the pension system to begin receiving my survivor benefit, I was told that their records showed Raymond had elected the single life option, the higher payment, no survivor benefit, and that as a result, the pension had ended at his death. I was 61 years old, recently widowed, and was told by a pension administrator that I would receive nothing. What happened next is not a story about bureaucracy, though it is in it. It is a story about a woman who had spent 24 years on the inside of exactly the system that had just failed her, who knew where every record lived and what it was required to contain, and who pursued the correction with the methodical precision of someone who has spent a career knowing that pension errors are real, that they happen, and that they are correctable if you know what to look for. Welcome to Calm Drama Stories. My name is Dorothy, and this is the channel where the work you spent decades doing turns out to be the work that saves you when the institution makes a mistake.
Subscribe.
Drop your city in the comments. This story starts with a phone call that told me I had nothing and ends with a formal correction, retroactive payments, and a monthly benefit that will continue for the rest of my life. And between those two things is a copy of a form I kept in a filing cabinet for 11 years. Let me tell you about Raymond and about the retirement decision. Raymond Frimpong had worked as a building inspector for the city for 29 years. He was methodical about his work and careless about paperwork, a combination I had managed for our entire marriage with what I would describe as loving exasperation. He remembered every building code he had ever read and forgot to file our tax extension 3 years in a row. When he retired, I sat with him through the pension election process. Not because I was managing him, because I knew from 24 years of doing this work that the election form was the most consequential financial document he would ever sign, and that people make errors on it, and that those errors are sometimes not caught until someone dies and the surviving spouse finds out what was actually elected. We reviewed the options together. He chose the joint and survivor option, specifically the 100% joint and survivor benefit, which would reduce his monthly payment by a meaningful amount but would guarantee that I received the same payment for the rest of my life if he died first. He understood the trade-off. He made a deliberate choice.
He signed the form.
I watched him sign it. The retirement counselor processed the paperwork in the office. Raymond received a confirmation letter 2 weeks later that I filed because I file everything that stated his election and his monthly benefit amount. 11 years later, I opened my filing cabinet and I found that letter. The phone call from the pension system came on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after Raymond's death. The administrator was professional and kind and delivering information she had clearly delivered before, the particular gentleness of someone who has learned how to say something difficult. She said their records showed a single-life election. She said the pension had terminated at Raymond's death. She said I was not entitled to survivor benefits. I said, I have a confirmation letter from 11 years ago that states the joint and survivor election. She was quiet for a moment. Then, can you share that with us?
I said, yes.
I'd also like to know what documentation your system has for the election that was recorded. She said she would need to pull the file and call me back. I hung up the phone and went to the filing cabinet before she called back. The confirmation letter was there, exactly where I had put it 11 years ago. I read it. It stated clearly, joint and survivor, 100%. Monthly benefit, the reduced amount consistent with that election. I also found something I had not remembered I had: the original signed election form, which Raymond had been given a copy of at the closing appointment. His signature. The box checked: joint and survivor, 100%.
The date.
The retirement counselor's initials. I had two documents. The pension system was claiming a different election than both of them showed. This is the moment where 24 years of pension administration became the instrument of my own case. I knew what could cause this discrepancy. I had seen it happen in my own office years ago, not frequently, but it happened. Data entry error during the processing of the paper form into the pension system. A form that was correctly signed but incorrectly keyed. A box checked on paper that was entered differently in the database. The paper record and the electronic record diverging, and the electronic record becoming the one that the system relied on because no one went back to verify the paper. I also knew where the paper should still exist. Pension systems are required to retain retirement election documentation. Federal and state record-keeping requirements for defined benefit plans specify retention periods. The original signed form, the paper Raymond had signed in that office 11 years ago, should still be in his file. When the administrator called me back, I was ready. She confirmed their electronic record showed a single-life election. She said she was sorry. I said, I have two documents that contradict that record. I have the confirmation letter the system sent to my husband 2 weeks after his retirement, which states joint and survivor election, and I have a copy of the signed election form. I am requesting that the plan retrieve the original signed paper form from his physical retirement file and compare it to the electronic record. She said she was not sure if that was possible after 11 years. I said, under your plan's record retention policy and the applicable regulations for defined benefit plans, the original signed election form should be retained for the life of the participant plus a period afterward. Raymond died 14 months after retirement. That form should still exist. I am formally requesting that it be retrieved. I use the word formally. In pension administration, formally means, this is now documented, this is now part of the record, and the clock on your response obligation has started. She said she would escalate the request. The escalation took 3 weeks and involved 2 phone calls, a written request I submitted by certified mail, and a conversation with the pension system's member services director, a man named Howard who had, when I introduced myself and described my background, the particular alertness of someone who understands they are speaking with a peer rather than a confused widow. I said, Howard, I know how this happens. I'm not accusing anyone of deliberate error. I'm asking you to pull the paper file and verify the election against the electronic record. If the paper says joint and survivor and the electronic record says single life, you have a data entry error and a correction to make. He said, we don't usually have situations where the confirmation letter contradicts the system record. I said, I know. That's why I kept the confirmation letter. The paper file was retrieved from their archive storage. It took 11 days. The original signed election form said, joint and survivor, 100%. Someone 11 years ago had keyed the election incorrectly into the system. The paper was correct. The electronic record was wrong. Raymond had elected the survivor benefit. He had always elected the survivor benefit. The system had recorded the wrong thing and then paid the higher single life amount for 11 years, which meant Raymond had been receiving more than he should have been. Howard called me. He said, Mrs. Frimpong, the paper file confirms your husband's election. I said, I know. He said, the correction will need to be processed through our error resolution procedure. There will be an overpayment calculation, the difference between what was paid and what should have been paid under the joint and survivor election. I said, I understand. What is the timeline for correction and the commencement of my survivor benefit? The overpayment calculation was $8,200, the cumulative difference between the single-life payment Raymond had been receiving and the lower joint and survivor payment he had actually elected over 14 months. The pension system had the right to recover this from the estate, which they did. It came from Raymond's estate assets before distribution. My survivor benefit began the following month. It was retroactive to the date of Raymond's death, minus the overpayment, which meant I received a lump sum of 14 months of survivor benefits minus the $8,200 recovery. The net was approximately $19,400. I also now receive the monthly survivor benefit for the rest of my life. The amount Raymond had elected to protect me with, the amount he had signed for, the amount a data entry error had almost erased. What I want you to know, if your spouse has a pension or if you are approaching retirement and making your own election, is this. Keep the election documentation, the signed form, the confirmation letter. Keep both. When a defined benefit pension makes a survivor benefit election, the pensioner typically receives a confirmation letter within a few weeks of retirement. That letter is the record of what was chosen. Keep it in a filing cabinet, photograph it, store it somewhere your spouse can find it if you die first. This is not a document you trust to digital systems alone. Paper and a photograph, somewhere accessible. If you are not sure what election your spouse made, ask them to confirm it with the pension system now, while they are living, while the record can be corrected before it matters. One action, today, if your spouse has a pension, ask them to log into the pension system or call the administrator and confirm their survivor benefit election. Ask them to get it in writing. File that writing. This took me 24 years of professional experience and 11 years of keeping a letter to resolve. You can prevent the same situation with one phone call and a filing cabinet. The benefit is mine. The correction is done. Raymond's choice, the one he made deliberately, the one I watched him make, has been honored. That is what it was for. That is what I was for. Keep the paperwork. Know what was elected. That is the whole of it.